JWT or Basic Auth? What should you use? Well, we happen to use both. The question is, when should I use JWTs and when should I use Basic Auth? The choice is not always that simple, but in the following post, I'm going to describe when we have chosen to use either one. So with JWTs, our organization quickly decided that they were an effective solution on how our APIs could authenticate external users. The next question was, what is an external user? Well, they're obviously people that are consuming our APIs, which could be our clients, but are typically people external to our company. The other group of people that we considered external users wasn't so obvious. We decided that people external to our team that used applications which we did not manage were also external users. For example, our team has endpoints which provide configuration and user data. We have no intention of providing information from these APIs to our clients and also to other teams which consume our APIs in an independent manner. So the answer was that we decided to use JWTs for any application that would want to use our APIs, but our team did not manage. Now with Basic Auth, as you might have inferred, we chose to use Basic Auth for our internal team use. This includes APIs that only our team would use. We have control over our internal team applications, and as a result, Basic Auth provided a much simpler solution for those applications. There again, our applications require configuration and user knowledge that a simple authentication mechanism enables. More importantly, we can rely on and control the passing of information to our internal applications. What does this look like? Well, let's look at an example where an external client needs to retrieve customer information from one of our APIs. Omitting the retrieval of a JWT for API authentication, a client would send a JWT in an API request in the authorization header. And it would look like the following. The header authorization would have a bearer JWT token. The header is used to authenticate the API call to retrieve the customer. Internally, more authentication is occurring. For example, our customer API must first retrieve configuration data to get data from the data store. This occurs by calling an API which only our internal APIs can't access. To retrieve this configuration data, the customer API call to our configuration API would then pass basic authentication, and it looks like this. It would also be the authorization header, but in this case, it would pass basic and then a base64 encoded username and password. Now, it's important to note that the configuration API is not accessible to the client over the internet. This is important because when showing the difference between the two API calls, the external client does not have access to the configuration API, whereas they have access to our customer API. This adds simplicity to the calls made between the APIs, and it does not require the customer API to acquire a suitable JWT, nor does it require additional mechanisms to allow authentication. It's also worth noting that the simplification makes off-the-shelf API gateways much easier to implement. So in conclusion, our internal APIs are afforded a much simpler authentication mechanism to retrieve the data they need. Our external API consumers must use a short-lived JWT to retrieve the data they need. This allows us to better control our external users and prevent malicious use. This premise does keep in mind the use of an API gateway. Our external users only use the API gateway, which enforces the JWT authentication, whereas the internal users can interact inside our network using Basic Auth.